"They broke me," she whispered. But the cowboy held her through every nightmare till dawn. The sun had just begun its slow climb over the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. In a small, quiet town, surrounded by open fields and winding dirt roads, a young woman named Emily lived in a modest wooden house at the edge of the woods. The house was simple, but it held a weight far heavier than its walls could carry. For years, Emily had carried memories she could never forget, memories that haunted her nights and shadowed her days. Every morning, she woke before the sun, not because she wanted to, but because sleep often betrayed her. Her dreams were filled with fragments of her past, shadows of people who had hurt her, and moments she wished she could erase. She would lie in her bed, heart racing, hands trembling, until the morning light forced her to face the world again. Even in daylight, the world felt unsafe, and every sound, every glance reminded her of the times she had been broken. Emily moved quietly through her house, careful not to make noise, as if the walls themselves could betray her to the memories she tried to keep locked away. She poured herself a cup of tea, the steam rising slowly in the chilly morning air, and sat by the window. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and the soft song of birds tried to reach her, but the music of the world felt distant, almost unreachable. Her days were a routine of careful survival. She went to the small town market to buy her essentials, always avoiding eye contact, always keeping her distance from strangers. She spoke only when necessary, in soft, measured words that carried none of the warmth or trust that others seemed to take for granted. People noticed her quiet demeanor, some whispering behind her back, some pitying her. But Emily had learned long ago that pity could hurt as much as cruelty, so she kept to herself. Even though she lived in the town, Emily was alone. Her family had been distant, and friends were either gone or had turned away when they couldn't understand her pain. She had learned that trusting people came with risks she was not willing to take. And yet, despite the fear and the scars, there was a part of her that longed for safety, for someone who could understand her without demanding her to explain every broken piece of herself. It was during one of her routine trips to the market that she first noticed him, the cowboy. He was not like the others in town, and she had seen many men, many strangers, pass through the market, but none carried the calm confidence he had. He had a quiet presence, an ease about him that suggested he had faced his own struggles and had not let them break him. His hat shaded his eyes, but there was a softness in his gaze that made her catch her breath for a moment. The first encounter was brief, almost accidental. Emily dropped a basket of apples near his stall, and he bent down to help her gather them. His hands were strong but gentle, careful not to hurt her, careful not to step too close. She stiffened at first, unsure of how to react, but something in his calm smile made her relax, if only slightly. "It's all right," he said, his voice low and steady. "We all have moments like this." Emily didn't reply. She didn't know what to say, and words felt inadequate for the storm she carried inside. But she noticed him. She noticed the patience in the way he waited while she picked up the apples, the way he didn't press her to talk or explain herself. It was strange, unsettling even, that someone could be so present without being demanding. For a fleeting moment, Emily felt a warmth she had not felt in years. The days passed, and Emily began to see him more often. He wasn't intrusive. He didn't follow her or demand her attention. Instead, he worked quietly in the fields, mended fences, and helped the elderly in the town. Every so often, he would offer a nod or a gentle smile, enough to acknowledge her without forcing her to interact. Emily found herself looking forward to those small gestures, though she would never admit it. They stirred something fragile in her heart, a small flicker of trust that she had long thought impossible. Even with his presence, Emily's nights remained filled with fear. She would wake in the dark, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as shadows danced on the walls. Sometimes she would scream, though no one could hear her. Sometimes she would curl into herself, trying to hide from memories that clawed at her mind. It was during one of these nights that she whispered the words that had never left her lips before. "They broke me." The sound was barely audible, lost in the quiet of her room, yet it carried all the weight of years of pain. That night, the cowboy was there. He had been tending to the horses nearby and heard her cries, or perhaps he simply sensed her fear. He didn't enter with words or questions. He sat by her side, a silent guardian in the darkness. When she felt his presence, Emily flinched, expecting him to judge or leave. But he stayed. He placed a hand on hers, warm and steady, and held it through the trembling and the tears. He didn't speak. He didn't try to fix her. He only stayed, and that simple act of presence became a lifeline. The dawn was slow that day. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, touching her face and revealing the raw exhaustion in her eyes. She had slept, though not peacefully, and she had cried, though not fully free of the shadows that haunted her. But she had survived the night, and for the first time in a long while she felt that someone had been with her, truly with her, through the darkness. Emily didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could ever fully trust another person, or if the scars of her past would always whisper warnings in her ear. But she knew this. There was someone who had seen her brokenness and had not turned away. That knowledge, fragile as it was, planted a seed of hope in her heart, a seed she hadn't dared nurture before. Over the next few days, Emily noticed small changes in herself. She would linger a little longer near the market, watching the cowboy from a distance, feeling a strange comfort in knowing he was there. She began speaking in short sentences, offering quiet greetings and even smiling occasionally, though always cautiously. The world still felt dangerous, and the memories of her past still loomed, but the weight seemed a little lighter, carried in part by someone who understood without needing her to explain. By the end of the first week, Emily realized something important. She wasn't completely alone. For years, she had believed that her pain made her untouchable, unworthy of kindness or care. But his presence challenged that belief. He didn't fix her, and he didn't try to erase her past. He simply held a space for her, a quiet, unwavering space where she could exist with all her fears and scars and still be seen as worthy. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Emily found herself standing near the fence where the cowboy was repairing a gate. She didn't know why she had come, and she didn't know if she wanted to speak. But she stayed, watching him work in the fading light. He glanced up, nodded, and gave her a gentle smile. She felt a lump in her throat and whispered almost to herself, maybe I can survive this." The cowboy didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said enough, that he would be there without judgment through the storms and the nightmares. And in that moment, Emily felt a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. It was fragile and it was tentative, but it was real. As night fell, Emily returned to her house, her heart still heavy but slightly lighter. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, and she knew that her nightmares would not vanish overnight. But she also knew she had someone who could walk beside her, someone who could hold her hand through the darkest hours. And for the first time in many years, that knowledge felt like a lifeline strong enough to keep her tethered to hope. She lay in her bed, listening to the wind rustle through the trees and the distant sounds of the town, settling into sleep. Her body was exhausted, her mind still restless, but she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She whispered into the darkness once more, almost a test, almost a confession. "They broke me." And though the words trembled, she felt his presence, steady and unwavering, reminding her that she was not alone. For the first time in years, Emily closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. Not with fear, but with the faintest glimmer of trust. Outside, the moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the fields and somewhere in the quiet of the night. A cowboy stayed, holding her through every trembling moment, through every shadow, through every nightmare, until the first rays of dawn promised a new day. Days turned into weeks, and Emily began to notice subtle changes in her life, small moments that felt almost magical, though she dared not call them that. The cowboy, whose name was Luke, became a quiet presence in her days. He never forced conversation, never asked questions he didn't need answers to. He simply existed in her world in a way that felt steady, comforting, and slowly almost necessary. Emily still woke in the early hours, her heart hammering from dreams she wished she could forget. But now, when she caught herself trembling, she felt a strange sense of relief knowing that Luke might be nearby, tending to his chores outside or riding slowly along the dirt road. Sometimes, just imagining his calm presence helped her breathe. The nightmares did not vanish. They never would, but they began to lose some of their power over her. She was still fragile, but she was learning to survive, even if it was only moment by moment. Life in the small town continued its quiet rhythm. Emily would go to the market, buy groceries, and return home. The townspeople still whispered, but she paid them little mind. Her focus was elsewhere, on the small ways Luke had begun to touch her life without ever intruding. One morning, she noticed him mending a fence along the edge of his property. He looked up, nodded, and gave a brief smile, which made Emily's chest tighten. It was strange how a single gesture could stir feelings she had thought buried under years of fear. Their interactions were always cautious, measured. Luke never crowded her. If she lingered too long in the market, he would acknowledge her with a quiet nod, and that was enough. If she passed by his property, he would tip his hat and return to his work. But even these small gestures had power. They reminded Emily that someone could care for her without demanding her to explain the pieces of her broken past. That idea alone was almost unbearable in its newness. Emily's days were still hard. Memories crept up in unexpected ways, sometimes in the way someone looked at her, sometimes in the sound of a car door slamming or the sudden flash of a scene from her past. She often felt as if she were teetering on the edge of a fragile glass bridge. But Luke's presence, always steady, was like a rail she could grip when the fear became too much. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult morning, she found herself walking past his property, unsure why she had gone there. Perhaps she needed to see him, perhaps she needed to remind herself that the world could still hold someone kind. Luke noticed her immediately. He was tending to the horses, brushing them carefully, and yet the moment his eyes met hers, he stopped. He didn't call out, didn't wave overly enthusiastically. Instead, he walked toward her slowly, a natural ease in his movements, as if he had been expecting her all along. Emily felt her chest tighten. She wanted to run, wanted to retreat, but she found her feet rooted to the ground. "Hi," Luke said quietly, his voice calm and even. Emily nodded, unsure what to say. Words often failed her, especially around people who made her feel safe. That safety was both terrifying and welcome. "Hi," she murmured back, almost a whisper. He smiled faintly. "Everything okay?" She shook her head quickly, not trusting herself to speak the truth. But he didn't push, he didn't demand an answer. Instead, he gestured toward a small bench near the barn and sat, patting the space beside him. It was an unspoken offer, a gentle invitation to share space without words. Emily hesitated, her mind racing, but eventually she moved to sit beside him, her shoulders tense, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, and the horses moved gently in the background. Luke kept his gaze soft and steady, neither probing nor prying. Emily felt herself relaxing slowly, the tension in her chest unwinding just a little. She realized that no one had ever allowed her to sit in silence and still be cared for. Most people either demanded stories or avoided her entirely. Luke did neither. Over the next few days, Emily began spending small amounts of time near him, observing, listening, and slowly letting herself exist without constant fear. They would sit quietly, sometimes not saying a word, other times talking in short bursts about trivial things, the weather, the horses, the rhythm of the fields. Emily discovered that it was not the conversations that mattered most, but the feeling of being present with someone who did not judge her pain. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with gold and orange streaks, Emily found herself watching Luke ride along the edge of the field, guiding the horses. Something about the way he moved, confident, careful, respectful of the animals, made her heart ache with longing for a sense of normalcy she had never known. She realized she had begun to notice details about him she had never allowed herself to notice about anyone else. The gentle way he laughed, the quiet strength in his hands, the patience that seemed endless. Despite the small steps forward, her past never left her. Flashbacks would still hit unexpectedly, leaving her trembling, her stomach churning, and her mind spinning with fear. One night, she awoke from a dream so vivid that she felt as if she were back in the worst moments of her life. She gasped for breath, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment she felt utterly alone. Then she felt a presence in the room, a weight of warmth on her shoulder. Luke had sensed her distress. He didn't ask questions or try to reason with her. He simply held her, letting her tremble and cry against him. He whispered gentle words, soft and steady, not to erase the pain, but to remind her that she was not alone. Emily clung to him, exhausted and afraid, and for the first time she allowed herself to lean fully on someone. In those moments she realized something important. Trust was fragile, but it could grow. Patience and consistency mattered more than words or grand gestures. Luke's presence was a steady rhythm she could anchor herself to, a rhythm that allowed her to survive each night, each nightmare, each flash of memory. As the weeks passed, Emily began to tentatively open up, sharing small pieces of her story, not all at once, but in bits and pieces when she felt safe. Luke listened, never interrupting, never judging. When she faltered or cried, he simply offered his presence. When she smiled for the first time in months, he celebrated quietly, as if her joy were a delicate flower to be nurtured rather than a spectacle to be applauded. There were setbacks, of course. Some days, Emily felt as if the weight of her past would crush her entirely. On those days, she avoided the town, stayed in her house, and retreated into her own thoughts. Luke respected those boundaries, never pressing, never insisting she explain herself. His patience was a quiet force, and Emily began to realize that patience was a form of love she had never experienced before. One afternoon, while helping him gather firewood, she slipped on the wet ground and twisted her ankle. Luke was immediately at her side, supporting her with gentle hands, helping her to a safe spot and tending to the injury with care. She noticed the quiet attentiveness, the way he didn't make her feel weak or incapable, but instead offered strength in a way that made her feel safe. It was moments like these, simple but profound, that began to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. Emily also began to notice small joys in her life that she had long ignored. She would watch the sunrise from her window, seeing colors she hadn't noticed before. She began caring for a small garden, planting flowers that slowly bloomed, reminding her that life could grow even after pain. She found herself laughing quietly at the antics of animals in Luke's care or at little moments of absurdity in her day. And each time she felt a spark of happiness, she realized it was because someone, Luke, had created space for her to feel safe. One night, as they sat together under a vast, starry sky, Emily allowed herself to speak more honestly than she had in months. I don't know why you care so much," she said, her voice trembling. Luke looked at her, calm and unwavering. "Because everyone deserves someone who stands by them," he replied softly. "Even you." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to push him away, to remind him that she was broken. But she couldn't. Instead, she leaned slightly against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and let herself exist in the moment. For the first time in a long time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could be cared for without being judged. As the night deepened, Emily felt a sense of fragile hope. She knew her journey would not be easy, that the nightmares and memories would continue to surface, but she also knew that she no longer had to face them alone. Luke's presence was a constant, gentle reminder that someone could hold her through the darkness without trying to fix her, without trying to erase her pain, without rushing her to be something she was not ready to be. And in that quiet, star-filled night, Emily allowed herself to whisper a promise, not to him but to herself. She would try. She would try to trust again, to believe that life could hold moments of safety, kindness, and even love. And though the path ahead was uncertain, she felt a small but growing courage, enough to take the next step, enough to meet each day with the quiet knowledge that someone, Luke, would be there to hold her through it all. The days had grown longer, and the warmth of summer filled the small town, but Emily's heart still carried the chill of her past. Life with Luke had brought her moments of peace and comfort, yet she knew that the shadows inside her were never far behind. Some nights she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the pulse of memories she wished she could forget. The nightmares had become less frequent, but when they came, they struck harder, shaking her from sleep and leaving her gasping for breath. One afternoon, a visitor arrived in town, a man from her past, someone whose presence Emily had feared for years. The sight of him sent her heart racing and her stomach twisting with dread. Memories she had thought buried came rushing back, vivid and cruel. She felt exposed, cornered, as if all the progress she had made might crumble in an instant. Her first instinct was to hide, to lock herself away, to pretend that she had never seen him. Luke noticed her sudden tension. He had been helping repair a fence near her property, and when he saw the look in her eyes, he approached cautiously. Emily didn't speak. She couldn't. The man's gaze had already found hers, and a flood of fear and anger washed over her. She wanted to turn and run to escape, but her legs refused to move. Luke didn't demand an explanation. He simply stayed close, his presence a steadying force. He gently took her hand, giving it a small squeeze as if to say, "I am here." "You are safe." Emily clung to that reassurance like a lifeline, her body trembling as she faced a past she had tried desperately to forget. The man from her past lingered, making casual conversation, but Emily barely registered his words. Her mind was filled with the hurt he had caused, the betrayal she had suffered, the nights she had cried herself to sleep alone. Luke stayed beside her, silent but vigilant, allowing her to exist in the moment without pressure. He didn't speak over her fear, didn't try to fix the situation. He simply offered a safe harbor, and for the first time, Emily realized she could breathe even in the presence of the storm. As the man finally left, Emily sank onto a nearby bench, burying her face in her hands. Tears fell freely, unrestrained, releasing years of pent-up pain. Luke knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. She flinched at first, expecting judgment or impatience, but his touch was steady, kind, and unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "No matter what comes, I'll be right here." Those words pierced through the walls Emily had built around her heart. For years, she had believed that no one could stay with her through her pain, that anyone who tried would eventually leave. But Luke's presence proved otherwise. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she allowed herself to lean into him, letting the weight of her fear and sadness rest against a shoulder that could bear it. That night, the nightmares returned with a vengeance. Emily woke screaming, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. Luke was already there, as if he had anticipated her fear. He held her close, rocking her gently, whispering calm words she couldn't fully hear but somehow understood. For the first time, she let herself surrender completely to someone else's care, letting go of the need to appear strong or brave. The next morning, Emily felt exhausted, yet oddly lighter. The intensity of the previous night had left her raw, but Luke's presence had reminded her that she was not alone. He didn't try to make her forget, didn't offer easy solutions. He simply stayed by her side, steady and patient, and that consistency was slowly beginning to heal the cracks inside her heart. Over the following weeks, Emily faced more reminders of her past. Sometimes they were subtle, a word, a glance, a sound that triggered memories she had tried to bury. Other times they were more direct, like unexpected encounters with people who had once caused her pain. Each time, her first instinct was to retreat, to shut herself away, to convince herself that she could never be safe again. But Luke was always there. He didn't force her to confront her fears before she was ready, nor did he leave her to face them alone. Instead, he created small opportunities for her to reclaim her strength, gentle encouragement to step outside, quiet reassurance when panic rose, and moments of ordinary kindness that reminded her of the possibility of trust. One evening, after a particularly tense day, Emily found herself pacing in her house, unable to quiet her racing thoughts. Luke entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He set one down beside her and sat without speaking, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. Emily stared at her hands, unsure whether to speak or retreat, and then, almost without realizing it, the words spilled out. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I don't know if I can ever be okay." Luke nodded, understanding without judgment. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "It doesn't mean you're weak, it just means you've been through a lot, and you don't have to face it alone." For a long time, Emily said nothing. She sipped the tea he had brought, letting its warmth seep into her, letting his steady presence remind her that she could survive fear without being consumed by it. Slowly, she began to speak, sharing fragments of her past, admitting fears she had never voiced aloud. Luke listened without interruption, without correction, without pity. He simply held space for her truth, and in that holding, Emily felt a flicker of relief she hadn't known in years. Despite the progress, there were moments of intense struggle. One afternoon, a minor argument with a neighbor triggered memories of past betrayals, and Emily lashed out, frustrated and frightened. She said harsh words she didn't fully mean, pushed Luke away, and ran to the safety of her house. Her heart raced, guilt and fear battling inside her, leaving her exhausted and trembling. Luke did not follow immediately. He understood her need for space, but he did not disappear. He remained nearby, quietly tending to his chores, waiting until she was ready to face him. That evening, when Emily finally emerged, he was sitting by the fire outside, a gentle smile on his face. He did not scold or question. He simply gestured for her to join him. Emily hesitated, then slowly walked over, her body tense and unsure. Luke offered his hand, not demanding anything but offering support. She took it, feeling the familiar warmth and steadiness she had come to rely on. That night, under the soft glow of the firelight, she allowed herself to cry again, this time without fear of judgment. As the weeks passed, Emily began to recognize the pattern of her own healing. The nightmares still came, the memories still haunted her, but she had a steady anchor in Luke. She began to laugh again, small, quiet laughs at first, then longer and more genuine. She tended to her garden, cooked meals she had once abandoned, and began to imagine a future where fear did not dictate every action. One night, as they sat together outside, watching the stars twinkle against the dark sky, Emily turned to Luke, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. You stayed when no one else would." Luke shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I care about you, that's enough." Her chest tightened with emotion. For years, she had believed that her pain made her unworthy of care, that her past would always define her. But Luke's presence challenged that belief. He did not erase her past, did not demand that she pretend it didn't exist. He simply offered a constant, unwavering support that made her feel seen, valued, and safe. As the night deepened, Emily realized that she was beginning to trust again. Not fully, not without caution, but enough to lean on someone else without fear of being abandoned. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, that the memories she carried were part of her and could never be fully erased. But she also knew that she no longer had to face them alone. The true turning point came one night when a particularly vivid nightmare shook her awake. She screamed, thrashing in the darkness, and for a moment panic gripped her entirely. Luke was immediately there, holding her close, his voice calm and steady, his hands gentle on her back. "You're safe," he whispered repeatedly. "I'm here. I won't let anything hurt you." Emily clung to him, trembling, sobbing, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, she began to calm. The nightmare did not disappear, but the terror it once held seemed smaller, less powerful. She realized that her fear did not have to control her as long as she had someone to stand with her, someone patient and kind, someone who would hold her through every moment of darkness. By the end of part 3, Emily had reached a fragile but meaningful victory. She had confronted moments of her past, faced fears that threatened to overwhelm her, and recognized that trust, while difficult, was possible. Luke had been a steady presence, not a savior, but a partner in her healing journey. And for the first time in years, Emily could imagine a life where she might not be broken entirely, where hope and care could exist alongside the memories she carried. The days grew longer, the air warmer, and Emily began to notice a subtle shift in herself. She was still fragile in many ways, and the memories of her past still visited her, often uninvited, but the weight of those memories no longer pressed on her chest as heavily as before. Luke's steady presence had become a constant in her life, a soft, unwavering light that reminded her that even in darkness, someone could stand beside her without judgment or demand. Emily's mornings were no longer filled solely with fear. She would rise with the sun, take a deep breath, and step outside, noticing the way the morning light painted the fields and the trees with gold. Some days were easier than others, and some nights still brought nightmares that left her heart racing. But each night she survived brought a little more courage, each morning offered a little more hope. And Luke was there for every step, never pushing her, never rushing her, only offering support and patience. The small town continued its quiet rhythm, and Emily began participating in it more fully. She would go to the market, greet neighbors with a tentative smile, and even share small conversations with people she had once avoided. She still carried caution, but there was a growing confidence in her posture, a soft strength that came from knowing she was no longer alone. Luke often accompanied her on errands, helping with baskets or leading the horses nearby. His presence was steady, never overbearing, always kind. Emily began spending more time outdoors, tending to her small garden and walking along the dirt paths that stretched through the fields. The simple tasks which once felt impossible now gave her small moments of joy. Flowers bloomed under her careful hands, and she found herself smiling quietly at the colors and scents she had once ignored. There was a rhythm to life again, a sense that growth was possible, both in the earth and in her heart. One evening, after a long day of tending to the horses and finishing chores, Emily and Luke sat together on a hill overlooking the town. The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky with warm hues of orange, pink, and gold. Emily leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder beneath her head. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, letting the world speak through its gentle sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the soft whisper of the wind. "You've changed," Luke said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Emily lifted her head slightly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think I'm finally starting to heal," she admitted. "Not completely, not yet, but I can feel it slowly." Luke's smile was calm, filled with quiet pride. "Healing isn't a straight path," he said. "It comes in pieces, in small steps, and you've taken more steps than you realize." Her chest tightened with emotion. For so many years, she had believed that her past defined her entirely, that the pain she carried was permanent and insurmountable. But Luke's presence had shown her otherwise. He had never tried to erase her memories or push her to forget. He had simply stood beside her, holding her through every trembling night, every storm of fear, every reminder of the pain she had endured. And in doing so, he had given her something she had long thought impossible: hope. The following weeks were filled with quiet moments of connection. Emily would join Luke in tending to the horses, learning how to care for them with patient guidance. She began helping with chores around the property, each task a small victory over the fear and hesitation that had once paralyzed her. She found herself laughing more easily, the sounds soft but genuine, like music that had been missing from her life for far too long. Emily also allowed herself to explore her feelings more openly. She began speaking about her dreams for the future, sharing hopes she had once thought too fragile to voice. Luke listened attentively, encouraging her gently, never rushing, never questioning her worthiness of happiness. And in those moments, Emily realized that she could begin to trust again, not blindly but with careful steps, guided by the knowledge that someone truly cared. One morning, as she walked along the edge of the field, Emily noticed the sunrise spilling gold across the horizon. She paused, taking a deep breath, and felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. It was a small peace, easily disrupted by memories or fears, but it was real, and she knew that with Luke by her side, she could nurture it, protect it, and let it grow. Life was not perfect. Some days still brought anxiety, flashes of fear, or unexpected reminders of her past. But the difference now was that she had someone to face those moments with, someone to hold her through the storm until it passed. Luke had become more than a companion. He was a steadying force, a source of safety, and a reminder that she could survive the shadows of her past without being consumed by them. Emily's confidence grew slowly but surely. She began inviting Luke to join her for small activities, like tending the garden together, cooking meals, or walking through the nearby woods. Each shared experience strengthened the bond between them, deepening trust and building a sense of safety that Emily had never known before. She began to recognize that healing was not about erasing the past. It was about learning to live alongside it with courage, hope, and the support of someone who truly cared. One afternoon, a small festival came to the town. The streets were lined with booths, music played softly in the background, and the scent of fresh bread and flowers filled the air. Emily felt nervous at first, unsure if she could face the crowds, the sounds, the unfamiliar chaos. But Luke was there, his presence steady and reassuring. He held her hand lightly, guiding her through the streets, offering quiet words of encouragement when fear or hesitation arose. By the end of the festival, Emily was smiling, laughing softly at the music and the sights. She even tried a small ride on a carousel, holding Luke's hand tightly, feeling both exhilarated and safe. It was a moment of joy that had seemed impossible months ago, a small but significant milestone in her journey of healing. That night, as they walked home under the soft glow of the moon, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. She turned to Luke, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying, for never leaving, for holding me through everything." Luke smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I care about you, that's enough." Her chest tightened, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. For years, she had believed that she was unworthy of care, that her past made her untouchable. But Luke had shown her otherwise. He had not tried to erase her pain, he had not judged her for it. He had simply stood beside her, holding space for her healing, and in doing so, he had given her the courage to hope again. Over the following months, Emily's life continued to improve in quiet, steady ways. She began planting more flowers, tending a vegetable garden, and even hosting small gatherings with neighbors she had once avoided. She still faced moments of fear, but those moments became easier to manage with Luke by her side. Her laughter became more frequent, her smiles more genuine, and her heart began to feel lighter than it had in years. One particularly quiet morning, Emily and Luke sat together on the porch, sipping tea as the sun rose over the fields. The air was warm and gentle, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Emily leaned against him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her head. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, letting the world speak through its gentle rhythms. "I've come a long way," Emily whispered, her voice filled with both awe and relief. Luke's hand found hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You have," he said softly, "and you'll go even further. The past doesn't define you, you do." Her heart swelled with emotion. For years, she had believed that her past would always control her, that the pain she carried would always outweigh any hope for happiness. But now, with Luke by her side, she realized that healing was possible. Not perfect, not complete, but possible. She could carry her memories and her scars and still find joy, still find peace, still find love. As the sun rose higher, painting the fields in gold, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. She had survived the darkness, faced the memories that once terrified her, and learned to trust again. And through it all, Luke had been there, holding her through every trembling moment, every nightmare, every doubt, until she could finally see the light of dawn, not just in the world around her, but in her own heart. And in that quiet golden morning, Emily whispered softly, almost to herself, "I'm still healing, but I'm not alone anymore." Luke's hand tightened gently around hers, a silent promise that he would remain, that together they could face whatever challenges life brought, and that hope, love, and care could indeed grow even from the deepest pain.